Hi, this is You Gon' Learn, and I'm Mrs. R, and today we're talking about the bigoted history of Mark Bray and the Antifas. Mark Bray was sort of brought up from Dartmouth to represent the Antifas as their apparently ideological, intellectual historian. He went to Wesleyan, and that's where he became an anarchist. And then he joined the Occupy Wall Street movement, and he is a man of the people, and he understands us, he understands our needs, and he understands our movements quite clearly. The reason that we need to talk about Mark Bray specifically is because through Mark Bray they're building a particular argument for a particular response to the situations that we now face, and this argument is problematic for a whole host of reasons, one of which being that their worldview is actually incredibly racist and sexist. Mark Bray himself is in fact Jewish. Just because he's Jewish doesn't mean the fact that he has argued that the English fought off fascism because Jewish boys were fighting fascists in the streets is really anti-Semitic to the people that couldn't fight off fascism in Germany and France, and it's also just really bad history. We know why England didn't fall to fascism, and it wasn't because of Jewish boys having street brawls. It is one of the oldest democracies in the world. It had Winston Churchill at the helm, could have very easily gone fascist if not for the English people. Part of its advantage was that it was on an island and not part of the continent. That argument is just wrong, and it's incredibly anti-Semitic to the Jewish resistance fighters and the Dutch resistance fighters and the French resistance fighters and everyone else that was involved. He's also taken it upon himself to completely erase the women's movement. According to Mark Bray, did you guys know that the anarchists are the ones that fought illiteracy? I kind of thought it was the women's movement that was fighting illiteracy, but I guess not according to Mark Bray. He also took credit for the labor movement, which really should be offensive to just about everyone on the left in this country, but is particularly offensive to black organizers that were around in the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance, the women's movement. The labor movement was brought about by the women's movement, you idiots. This is just basic US history, like it's really upsetting. And then he just decides that the only anarchists that count are European socialists that happen to follow his particular brand of anarcho-syndicalism. And he claims that Europe came up with anarchism in the 1800s, which is conveniently when communism started being a thing. Just, it's a little obvious, Mark, is what I'm saying. It's a little obvious. As if there was no anarchism before that. He just calls them proto-anarchists, like it's just conveniently, he can just erase the Taoists. Any of the non-state-based movements in North America or in Latin America that existed prior to contact, that he can just erase every actual indigenous movement in Africa and Asia, and not just erase them, but give white folks the credit for those movements as if they didn't rise up on their own.
A legal system that existed before the English legal system even was known about. It existed before the French legal system. It existed before the Roman legal system. It was in Ireland for thousands of years. As long as our history has a record, we have this legal system. Today, legal scholars and historians are starting to look back to this system as an example of an anarchic society.
To the real anarchists out there, you guys might want to have a chat, because according to him, none of you guys are anarchists unless you practice a specific form of anarchism which involves socialism, which is based on Marx. Now, just so we're clear, Marx was an anarchist. To cover this up, what Mark Bray does is that he occasionally throws in the anarchist thinker Bakunin. Bakunin believed in the removal of all states. He didn't believe in a transition of the dictator or the proletariat. He believed in the rising up of the masses, them taking over the state and creating a completely free, stateless society. And it's quite clear from the rhetorical shifts that Mark Bray makes by just mostly using Marx and then conveniently throwing in Bakunin in case, somebody points out what he really is, that he believes in a top-down structure, this movement. Like, he can say whatever he wants, but if you quote Marx that much and you continue to promote the things that he's promoted, you believe in a top-down structure. Now, this erasure of the indigenous anarchists and basically every form of anarchism except his own, comes from a claim that he makes where he says these are trans-historical, as if they can be decontextualized from their history, and as if these histories don't have ideological purposes and roots themselves. One of Mark Bray's other big claims is that there are, in fact, successful anarchists.
The Spanish Revolution, in my opinion, represents the most successful example of workers' power put into practice.
Okay, and there's problematic aspects to that claim, which is, first of all, that there's never been a successful anarchist state. We'll get into the Spanish case in a minute, because he's right that it's the most successful case of it, and it will exactly make my point. But every movement that he lists, France, Italy, Portugal, right before the rise of Hitler in the 1920s, all became fascist. And he admits that anarchism in the past has led to repression. I want to be really clear about this. It always leads to repression. The state's interest is to protect itself. If a group runs around saying that they're gonna overthrow the state, and they're this poor as planning, as anarchists are, they're never gonna succeed, you guys. Every time the anarchists have tried this shit, it's led to repression. Because they don't know how to run a state. Because they're anarchists, you guys. They don't believe in them. One of the reasons the Spanish failed, you guys, was, first of all, they were offered power early on and they didn't take it because, you know, that would have been not the ideologically pure thing to do.
The anarchist leaders refused on principle to join the new central government.
And two, they didn't know how to run a military.
Everywhere the militias were being held or defeated by the advancing rebel armies. The militia columns, brave but disorganized, had no unified command.
And it's amazing because when they're talking about their own experiences and why they didn't succeed, they go, we were anarchists, we didn't know how to fight. Because they're anarchists, you guys. Militaries require a hierarchy to function. It's ridiculous. I want to emphasize the fact that it lasted 3 years and led to Franco. Okay? Lasted 3 years, led to Franco. 3 years, Franco. Now, you don't know who Franco is.
General Francisco Franco led a military uprising against Spain's elected left-wing government. He embraced fascism. Here he is meeting Hitler. German planes bombed Spanish cities to help him.
He ruled until 1975, and upon his death, they still won't acknowledge that he did anything wrong. And you want to know why? Because according to the Spanish themselves, it happened because the anarchists engaged in violence.
The upheaval of revolution led to terrorism and repression. In Aragon, as in Catalonia, armed gangs drove around killing the better off, the right-wingers and the followers of the church. Although the local committee tried to prevent it, 6 right-wingers were murdered just outside the village.
Okay, so they can't convince the rest of the country that the slaughter and roundup of all of the leftists in the country was a war crime because the rest of the country is like, well, the leftists committed war crimes too.
No one disputes that there were atrocities on both sides in the Spanish Civil War when Republicans held control here. One estimate is that about 1,000 people were executed for their nationalist sympathies. In all, about 3,600 were killed here and dumped in a mass grave. As Francisco Espinosa explains, Republicans on the left of politics had earlier shot nationalists from the right on the same spot.
So it's a perfect illustration of exactly all of the points that I've been making. They were engaged in terrorism, they bombed churches, and you know what happened when they bombed churches and went after people's churches?
6 days after it started, around July the 25th, 10 or 11 industrialists were killed in Terrassa. They were murdered. The Catalan bourgeoisie was seized by this general panic. Everybody thought his head was going to be chopped off any minute.
Revolutionary terror spread through the Republican areas. The middle classes in most of Spain had supported the army rebellion, but the liberal Catalan middle classes had remained largely pro-Republican. Now they became the victims of this terror and turned against the Republic.
The middle class said, holy shit, we don't want this kind of chaos. We don't want this kind of violence. We don't want our churches being bombed. And they joined up with the fascists to round them up. And this has happened so many times throughout history that it's amazing, because Spanish anarchism is supposed to be Mark Bray's area of expertise. Do you understand? Like, it's not like some topic, he's not Noam Chomsky. Like, he's not just like going around just talking about whatever he wants because he can, because he's Noam Chomsky, okay? This is supposed to be his area of expertise, and he's my age. He loves this trade union thing. We'll get into what anarcho-syndicalism is in a minute, but he loves this trade union thing. They're not really functioning. Only like 30% of America actually belongs to a union, whereas something like 90% of Catalonians did at the time of the Spanish Revolt. So how the hell would we have a trade union organizing-led movement when we don't have trade unions and when the economy isn't set up by guilds among industrial trades anymore? Nobody's even in the industry the Spanish anarchists were talking about anymore. This is America, bitch! Like, get context specific! This is what happens when you call things transhistorical and say they don't have a context. You don't know how to operate in the context you're fucking in. The other thing is that he claims that this was a non-hierarchical movement. That's news to the Spanish anarchists. They had no idea that they didn't have organizational structures, a committee, military commanders in the field. Like, I'm not saying they were great at it, but they tried, you know what I mean? So it's a little bit of a different situation. It absolutely was hierarchical. So let's talk about anarcho-syndicalism and what that is. Some of you will recognize the word syndicalism, yes? Did you immediately conjure up images of the mob? Good, excellent, smart. It's really smart, you guys. Okay, because syndicalism, when the trade in an organizational structure, whether that's on the local or national level, are organized into unions which select leaders which are supposed to represent those trades at secret meetings where they plan things out. You understand? Okay? Do you know what we call that in America? Las Vegas. It's the mob, you guys. Anarcho-syndicalism is this idea that it's not supposed to be led by the state, that it's supposed to be led by these unions. Problem with that is exactly what I just said. You see, anarchists like to believe that that they can just eliminate all power. You guys know monkeys have hierarchies, right? Like, animals have hierarchies. Like, you can't eliminate all power. Like, I'm really sorry, because I know that sounds really good when you're high and a junior in college, but it doesn't actually work. And it literally gets us rounded up every time. And I want to leave with one final thought on who the greatest anti-fascist heroes of all goddamn time are, okay? Because everybody has been saying it wrong, everybody's been doing it wrong. There is only, and I repeat only, one country on earth that has single-handedly fought off fascists. That's right, I'm talking about the United Goddamn States of America. USA! 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 You guys want to learn from some great anti-fascist people? Call your grandma. Okay? Call her. Damn.